G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Stout, very stout. I think they call it stout because if you drink too much of it, that's what happens to you. You become stout. Which is probably as good an introduction as any from which to segue to the topic of this video, which has got to do with diet and obesity and diabetes, which are topics that attract a lot of attention lately in the Western world, largely because during my lifetime, since I started going to school, it's gone from having one or two very fat people per 10,000 to having probably one very fat person per 20 or 50 in Western society. And as the rate of overweightedness, obesity, fatness has increased over the years, we've come to a point in time where it's become statistically normal to be what 40 years ago would have been considered obese. It's just normal these days. I can remember being probably one of the fattest kids in the class. I was 7.5 stone when I was 11 years old. I got lucky, really, in a way. I got sent off to a boarding school that was going broke, and there wasn't much food, and it was bloody awful, low quality, horrible tasting shit that I didn't want to eat. So 2 years later, the boarding school closed, and I came out of it. I was the same weight, but I was a head higher. However, I never got down to the sort of weight that everybody else used to be back in the early 70s. I was always a bit pudgy. Once you put the weight on, you've developed the arteries and veins to support the fat. And then when you take the weight off, even though you burn up the fat and you breathe it out as carbon dioxide and water, the arteries and veins remain there. So if ever you come across a situation of famine again, you can pack the pounds on really fast. Might have taken you 2 or 3 years to get to be fat. It might take 6 months or a year of hard work dieting to lose the fat. Go off your diet for a month and you will blow up like a bloody balloon because the arteries and veins to support the fat are already there. That said, there's been a lot of evidence, and like 30 years ago when I was training as a nurse, or 35 years ago, we knew that diabetics, insulin-dependent diabetics who did a lot of exercise reduced the amount of insulin they needed. And recently, one of my American co-subscribers of a channel called Frugal Prepper, Tom, the Frugal Prepper, has decided that he's going to go on a ketoacidotic diet to get better control of his diabetes and to lose weight. And based on the orthodoxy that I became a distinguished registered general nurse by regurgitating for the exam, I was really worried about him, and I expressed my fears, and he told me what he thought he was doing, and I've watched what he's been doing, and I liked what he told me so much that I passed it on to my mother, who was also an insulin-dependent diabetic. And my mother started, well, not really adopting the full-scale version of the diet because she's 82, but what she did do was cut out a lot of carbohydrate and replaced it with a bit of animal fat and continued eating a lot of greens. And she's using less insulin and she's losing weight and she's feeling healthier and better too. So I was really pleased when just recently, 22nd September's New Scientist magazine, page 25, on the analysis column, which is a kind of a regular thing, they're featuring low-carb diets. Can cutting carbs help reverse diabetes? So here we go, Tom the Frugal Prepper, this is for you. If I just place a strategic claw hammer there to keep the blooming page in its place, By Claire Wilson. UK politician Tom Watson left a lot of people scratching their heads last week when he revealed he had lost 45 kilograms and, quote, reversed, unquote, his type 2 diabetes on a low-carb diet. Although it was coupled with an exercise regime, this is not supposed to be a healthy way to eat. What's going on? Watson's achievement cuts to the heart of the biggest controversy in nutrition science today. Mainstream medicine says diets should be low in fat and high in starchy carbohydrates such as bread, potatoes and pasta. People should especially shun saturated fat from red meat and dairy because this is said to raise cholesterol and so the risk of heart disease. This is the advice from the UK National Health Service and in most Western countries. According to this orthodoxy, weight depends on the balance between calories in and calories out. If you want to lose weight, you have no option but to double down on avoiding fat because it has more than twice the calories per gram as the other two main food groups, carbs and protein. If people have a low-fat, low-calorie diet, they do lose weight. And if they had type 2 diabetes to start with, their blood sugar levels may return to normal. But medicine's dirty secret is that this is not the only way. Watson's alternative approach is not a new one. It has been in and out of fashion, known variously as the Banting, Atkins or keto diet. It involves minimising all carbs, whether sugar or starch, including whole grain sources like brown rice. Instead, people fill up on protein and fat-rich foods like meat, fish, cream and butter. Right? They fill up on it. Even fruits are shunned because of their sugar, although vegetables help to bulk out meals. This is why supermarket shelves these days proffer carb substitutes like cauliflower rice and courgette spaghetti, that's zucchini spaghetti. One bonus is that people don't need the calorie count. It really shouldn't work, and yet it does. Randomised trials show that it is at least as good as low-fat diets at helping people lose weight. In fact, some trials suggest it is better. All that saturated fat doesn't even raise people's cholesterol. The explanation is unclear. Some advocates say it's because the body no longer needs to make as much insulin, the hormone the body uses to cope with an influx of sugar. Certainly, the low-carb approach is popular among people with type 2 diabetes, a disease of high blood sugar. Another theory is that low carbing forces your body to get calories by burning fat instead of sugar, which affects your metabolism. Skeptics say low carbing only works because the monotony makes people eat fewer calories overall, although they aren't counting them. But when people go short of calories, they generally get hungry, and one thing lower carbers like to shout about is that they aren't hungry. For now, the explanation for the success of low-carb dieting is unclear, but it certainly seems time for mainstream medicine to acknowledge that there is more than one way to lose weight. Watson has said he will set up an expert panel to look into ways to respond to the UK's burgeoning diabetes epidemic. If so, there could be interesting times ahead for nutrition science. So that's interesting. I understand the theory, I think. The idea is that human digestion and metabolism evolved to go through a feast or famine routine on a kind of a daily or weekly basis where you might have lots to eat for 2 or 3 days and then have nothing much to eat for a couple of days and then have a little bit and then have nothing and then have a lot again. And the theory is that when you've got available food, eat it, stack it on as fat, and then when you've got nothing, burn the fat. And you're supposed to go in and out of a fat-burning metabolism, if not daily, then at least every couple of days. When you've got a regular, steadily available, high-carbohydrate diet, you don't really need to go into fat-burning metabolism, so you have to really strictly regulate the amount of calories that you feed into the system, because otherwise you're just going to stack on that fat because you're not ever burning it. You've got a slow-release energy source in your gut, which means that you don't get peaks in your blood sugar levels. It seems that you've got a choice. You can have carbohydrates and vegetables, or you can have lots of fat and vegetables, because you get the fat when you eat the animals, because the animals have got a fair bit of fat in them. So that explains that. None of this says anything at all about heart disease or arteriosclerotic problems. Because one of the things that I still consider to be, quote, wrong, unquote, with eating animal fat or eating animal proteins, the theory is that you have to eat meat because it's a complete protein and you have to have a complete protein, otherwise you're going to die of starvation. But the fact is that the human alimentary canal cannot actually absorb a complete protein from the gut into the bloodstream. What happens is you break it down into amino acid chains, absorb the amino acid chains, and then assemble the amino acid chains into human proteins. So if you go out and eat half a dozen different kinds of vegetables and a little bit of nuts here and there, and occasionally you might have some milk in your coffee and have an egg on toast every now and then, you've got plenty of amino acids of all the different kinds to make the human protein. So you don't have to have meat. There's no meat that you can't go without. In the meantime, to eat meat, you have to eat animal fat, and animal fat doesn't dissolve in human blood. And because it doesn't dissolve in human blood, when it goes around the corners on the inside of your arteries, it tends to deposit itself in plaques on your artery walls, leading to coronary artery disease and atherosclerotic cerebrovascular accidents. And one of the things that I remember being impressed by was I was told that cod liver oil does not accumulate in plaques on the inside of your artery walls, whereas all other kinds of animal fat will. But olive oil, not only it doesn't accumulate there, it'll wash away old plaques over time. And that was given as one of the reasons why people on a Mediterranean diet could cope with maybe 30% meat in their diet without having a high incidence of heart attacks and strokes. So yeah, that's my theory, is you can have a lot of carbohydrates and bread and fruit in your diet, or you can have a lot of meat in your diet, but you're actually living on the vegetables. That's what's actually keeping you alive. Another factor to consider is that although something like celery might be 98% water, it also takes virtually no metabolic energy on the part of the gut to digest celery. Meat has a lot more energy in it because it's got the fat there. But it takes a huge amount of organic chemistry to digest the meat, to break it down so that you can absorb it. So therefore you don't have to eat as much energy in a vegetarian diet as you have to eat in a meat eater's diet in order to nourish and maintain yourself, because a meat eater's diet requires more energy to process. And you know, that's just my impression, the bloke who drinks strong beer in the middle of the day, because it's one of those not quite bitter cold, but cold, grey, drizzly days. And you can't really settle down to doing anything because at any minute, a bloody drizzle cloud will come in from the eastern horizon, wet you down on whatever project you are up to. So anyway, there you go. That's for Tom the Frugal Prepper and everybody else out there who's been paying attention to the current wave of fashionability of low carbohydrate diets in order to manage your diabetes and your obesity. And if that means that you're going to stop drinking sugary drinks, including beer, then it's got to be healthier. Has to work. Just as long as you don't eat so much animal fat that you clog your arteries and your heart stops or your brain dies. And another thing to remember is that there's a lot of different diets which can be deemed sufficient. There were Eskimos who lived on nothing but seals, but it turned out they ate the vegetation that was inside the seals' stomachs when they caught them, cooked it all up as soup. So they were not pure meat eaters, they were vegetarian. They were eating some vegetables. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that most of the vitamins and nutrients in rice is actually in the husk. So if you get brown rice and if you use seaweed sauce instead of soy sauce, that in itself can be deemed to be a complete diet. Boiled brown rice with seaweed sauce. It's terribly boring though. My mother tried it in 1971. I remember it. When I was a kid, she was one of the probably 3 or 4 heaviest women in town. And when I was 10 years old, she decided to try and do something about it. And we all started eating brown rice there with her for a while. It took about a week to decide that fried brown rice with vegetables was a whole lot more appetizing and easier to stick to the diet. But anyway, for what it's worth, I think this low carbohydrate diet might be the secret to reducing the weight of the human herd. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Ciao.